What is national debt? National debt is the total money a government owes to lenders. This can be split into two categories: domestic debt and foreign debt. Domestic debt is owed to individuals, banks, pension funds, and companies within the country. Foreign debt is owed to overseas lenders, such as other governments, international organizations, and foreign investors. Governments typically borrow money by issuing bonds, essentially promises to repay with interest at a future date. Investors purchase these bonds because they are considered relatively safe investments. In simple terms, a government sells an IOU, gets cash immediately, and commits to paying it back later, allowing it to fund projects and services without raising taxes instantly. Why countries borrow money? Countries borrow for multiple reasons, and it's not always because they're broke. Major infrastructure projects like highways, airports, and power plants require huge sums that are easier to fund over time rather than all at once. Borrowing also becomes necessary during recessions or crises to stimulate the economy. This is known as deficit spending. Wars and defense programs are another big reason for borrowing, as are emergencies such as natural disasters or pandemics. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments borrowed massively to support healthcare systems and provide economic relief. Borrowing allows a government to act quickly in urgent situations without immediately burdening taxpayers. Why every country has debt? In today's global economy, debt is a constant. Borrowing is often seen as a tool to fuel economic growth. It lets governments spend more than they collect in taxes, boosting employment and development. Trade imbalances also contribute. Countries that import more than they export may borrow to cover the gap. Most importantly, the global financial system itself is structured around debt-based money. Banks create money when they lend, and governments participate in this same cycle. Even wealthy, resource-rich nations like Saudi Arabia or Norway maintain debt because it provides financial flexibility without tapping too deeply into reserves. Who do countries owe money to? Government debt is owed to a variety of creditors. Domestic investors, including banks, pension funds, and ordinary citizens, hold a significant share by buying government bonds. Foreign governments also lend. For example, Japan and China own large portions of U.S. debt. International institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank lend to countries in need, especially developing nations. Private foreign investors, such as hedge funds and multinational banks, also hold substantial government debt. In the United States, about 2/3 of debt is held domestically, while the rest is owned by foreign entities, with Japan and China being the largest foreign creditors. The role of the IMF and World Bank. When countries face financial crises and cannot borrow easily from markets, they often turn to the IMF or World Bank. The IMF offers short-term loans to help stabilize economies, while the World Bank focuses on long-term development projects like infrastructure and poverty reduction. However, these loans usually come with strict conditions, known as structural adjustment programs, which may require the borrowing country to reduce public spending, privatize industries, or open its markets to foreign competition. While this can stabilize economies, critics argue it sometimes worsens social and economic inequality. Can countries just print more money? A country that controls its currency can technically print more money to pay debts, but this comes with risks. Printing money without matching economic growth leads to inflation, meaning prices rise and the currency's purchasing power drops. Zimbabwe in the late 2000s is a classic example, where overprinting led to hyperinflation so extreme that prices doubled in hours. Wealthy countries like the US can print money with fewer short-term risks because their currency is globally trusted, but even they risk long-term inflation if it's overdone. Printing is not a magic solution. It can create bigger problems than it solves. Why some countries have huge debt-to-GDP ratios. Debt is often compared to GDP to see how sustainable it is. Japan has the highest ratio, over 260%, yet it remains stable because most of its debt is owed to domestic investors, and interest rates are extremely low. The United States has a ratio of around 120%, but it can manage because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Developing countries, however, face bigger challenges when debt is high, especially if their debt is owed in foreign currency. In those cases, repaying debt becomes harder if their currency loses value, leading to potential crises. Is national debt always bad? Debt isn't inherently negative. If it funds productive projects like highways, education, or energy systems, it can boost the economy, create jobs, and generate more tax revenue over time. This is known as productive debt. Problems arise when borrowing is used only to cover day-to-day expenses or to pay interest on existing debt. This situation, called a debt spiral, makes it harder to invest in growth, trapping the country in perpetual borrowing. The interest trap. Every loan comes with interest, and governments are no exception. If interest payments take up too much of the national budget, less money remains for healthcare, infrastructure, and social services. Italy, for example, spends tens of billions of euros each year just on interest. Many low-income countries spend more on debt repayments than they do on education or healthcare. This limits long-term growth and can deepen poverty, creating a cycle that is difficult to escape. Could a country ever be debt-free? While it's possible, it's rare in the modern world. A few countries, like Brunei and Liechtenstein, have little to no debt due to their small populations and high natural resource revenues. For most countries, debt-free status is unrealistic because the global economy relies on borrowing and lending to function. Eliminating debt could disrupt financial markets and slow economic growth. What happens if a country defaults? Defaulting means failing to meet debt obligations. This can cause severe consequences. The country's currency may collapse, investors may flee, and the economy can enter a deep recession. Argentina is a well-known example, having defaulted several times, each time leading to inflation, unemployment, and reduced access to international loans. Defaulting also damages a country's reputation, making future borrowing more expensive or impossible. Why the debt keeps growing? Even in times of economic growth, debt often continues to rise. Governments frequently refinance old debt by issuing new bonds instead of paying off the principal. Spending demands for defense, healthcare, pensions, and infrastructure often increase faster than tax revenues. Interest payments also accumulate over time, making the total debt bigger each year. In many cases, the structure of the system means debt will almost always grow, not shrink. How this affects citizens. National debt affects everyday life more than people think. High debt can lead to increased taxes, reduced public services, or higher inflation. Inflation means your money buys less over time, while spending cuts can affect healthcare, education, and infrastructure. On the other hand, responsible borrowing can improve living standards by funding projects that create jobs and stimulate economic growth. The key is how the debt is used and managed, the global debt picture. As of 2024, total global debt, including governments, households, and businesses, has surpassed $300 trillion. Governments are responsible for about a third of that, while corporations and households make up the rest. This means the global economy is heavily dependent on borrowing. Debt is not just a national issue, it's a worldwide system that connects economies through finance and trade. Final reality debt is built into the modern financial system. Countries borrow from their citizens, foreign governments, banks, and international institutions. The challenge is not avoiding debt, but managing it in a way that supports growth instead of crushing it. For most nations, being completely debt-free is not the goal. The goal is keeping debt at a sustainable level while ensuring the money borrowed is used productively. If you learned something new today, hit the like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.